Thanks for the beautiful music, Jace. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name's Ian Curtis. I'm a systems engineering manager supporting the software-defined data center in healthcare. I have with me, leading the call, two systems engineers, both Jace Machado and John Harris, and they will talk about how to leverage tags for your cloud strategy. This is a key topic for many of our customers, not just for VMware services, but across the entire healthcare IT organization. Given the amount of content, though, that we have to cover, I'll leave everyone on mute, so please use the Q&A button below to ask your questions. Also, keep an eye out for poll questions as they pop up. And without further ado, Jace, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jace Machado. I'm a cloud management engineer with VMware for 3 years, and I cover the healthcare space in the West. Thank you for joining this morning. This is going to be a brief introductory webinar on our tag management strategy scenario or series. And we think that this is a really important topic that is foundational to a lot of our customers' overall infrastructure management strategy. A lot of our customers, they're using tags in different areas, and they really are looking to have a little bit of a bigger understanding of how other customers are using tags and kind of the implications of tags across the entire IT portfolio. So we've got a few slides we're going to go through to kind of talk about what tags are and how they're leveraged, and we've got a demo that we're going to show some tags in action, and then we're going to follow up with some tag best practices. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so tags are not really anything new, right? Everybody's seeing tags everywhere in the world. We see them in social media. There's tags that are part of how we imprint geo information into photos. And tags has really become the de facto standard of how the internet is organized. I spend a lot of time researching tags to build this content, and it's really profound, the implications of tags. It's kind of become the default taxonomy system of the internet. So it's very critical to the way we as humans organize the vast amounts of information in the world. And what's interesting about tags and how they're utilized in different arenas is that the way the tag is formatted and is implemented, it has a lot of implications in terms of the value you can get out of that system. So for example, in Instagram hashtags, they initially were meant to be a way to like look up Instagram posts and whatnot, but in reality, people just use them to kind of add a funny comment, right? So that's kind of a loose organization. On the other end of the spectrum, like the scenario I talk about with like imprinting geo information into photos, that's a very strict syntax and structure around how that information is imprinted and is looked up. So there's a lot of variance out there in the world. So when it comes to using tags in your IT infrastructure, we have a lot of opportunity. And as you can see here in the slide, there's a lot of things that we can do short term in terms of how we move workloads around and capacity planning and license management. Some of the overarching goals really are all about consolidating processes and implementing universal standardization. There's a lot of challenges with silos that still exist today, and different teams have different definitions. So we're really trying to consolidate. So if we look at a tag is kind of broken into two things. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a tag category. So these tag categories are typically going to be some aspect of your environment, some way that you're going to classify. And then on the right-hand side, there's the actual name of that tag. And together, that is a tag. And of course, what you're looking at right now, calling it a tag category and a tag name, this is VMware's definition of a tag components. You'll see that with some other providers, they might call these like a key value pair. So they go by different names, but in the end, they kind of have the same components on the left and the right. When you look at subtags, there can be even more information. So on the left-hand side, you can see that with those semicolons that there's actually a few levels of a tag category. And then on the right-hand side, there's actually a couple values within that tag. So this would be a more advanced tag. So let's start off with somewhere where a lot of VMware admins are familiar, inside of good old vCenter. So I'm sure many customers are using these, and when you log into vCenter, you'll see that you have an opportunity to define those tag categories, and you also have the ability to create those tags. So on the left-hand side there, you can see some tag categories have been created, and on the right-hand side, we can see some actual tags. So beyond just vCenter, we're also using tags across our entire portfolio. That's how we get synergy with having a common and consistent tag system in place. So on the left-hand side, we have VRNI, which is vRealize Network Insight, which is a complementary tool to NSX to help with traffic analysis and implementing firewall rules. So we are enabling a level of network management with tags. In the middle, we have vRealize Operations, VROPS. So we're doing all kinds of stuff there with tags. With this screenshot, you can see where we're doing license management and also performance management. And we're going to cover that in the demo next. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see we have vRealize Automation. So what you're looking at there is the cloud assembly component of VRA. Specifically, we're looking at the blueprint editor. And on the right-hand side there, we have the blueprint code. So whenever we're writing blueprint code, we're referencing tags. And that's how we kind of enable dynamic placement and infrastructure as code. So without any further ado, I'm going to skip to the next slide, and my colleague, John Harris, who is my counterpart for the central region, he's going to walk through a demo.
Hi, my name is John Harris. I'm a solutions engineer for the Cloud Management BU here at Business Unit VMware. I cover primarily healthcare, and today we're going to be talking about how you can leverage a tagging strategy to be able to drive workload optimization, leveraging vRealize operations. And this is just really to give you guys an example of how that might look. So let me give you kind of an overview of the scenario that I'm going to demo. This is one that I talk to customers about all the time. In this particular scenario, what I have is I have a cluster that's my MS SQL cluster. And on that MS SQL cluster, I want to make sure always my SQL servers are running there. And that's really due to licensing constraints. I want to make sure that it's always running there so I can reduce my SQL licensing. But I also want to make sure that if I have free space there, general purpose workloads can move onto that cluster, and that's not a problem. I also want to make sure that, I'm making that my clusters are balanced in a sense, or not even balanced, but if there's contention, things move around, right? And I'm not running into, issues that are, impacting my performance on those workloads. So let's kind of dive into how you might set this up, and then I'll kind of show you it live, working and show it in action. But basically what I've done is under operational intent, I've set it so that I want the moderate setting. So there's a balance setting, and that's going to balance your workloads out. That's going to kind of spread them like peanut butter across all your clusters. Moderate basically says I want to minimize workload contention, which is what I want. Or I can consolidate and say, fill up a cluster and move on to the next one. And I can even define some headroom here. If I want to make sure that there's some headroom available in all the clusters, maybe I have some sort of agent running or processes that I want to take into account. But I'm going to go ahead and hit save or cancel here because I've already got this configured. And then I'm going to go into edit here. And this is where you define business intent. This is really where we leverage the tags. As you can see here, it says applications, and that's because that's a category that I've defined in here. So let's go ahead and click the edit button. It's going to bring up a screen here. There's a bunch of default ones like operating system, environment, tier, network, other. I went ahead and created one. As you can see, add a new category here, and I called it applications. And then I have two sets of tags set up. I have one that's called app MS SQL and one that's called app general purpose. And what you'll notice here is I also have app MS SQL taking prioritization. And what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that if I have my cluster with MS SQL on there, and I also have that same cluster tagged with general purpose, MS SQL is always going to take, precedence. It's going to be we will always make sure that MS SQL is on there. And if it has to make a decision between a general purpose workload at MS SQL and not having a contention issue, MS SQL will always win. So I went ahead and set that up because that's the desired state that I want to have. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the save button here. What you'll also notice is from an optimization standpoint, I can, we're going to click this optimize now here in a second and let it do its thing, but I can also go in and I can schedule this. So I can have it run once, I can have daily, weekly, monthly type of settings. I can set an expiration based on how many runs or a date. And I can even click this automate button. And if I click this automate button, it gives me a screen here. And it's basically telling you, if you continue with this, it's going to optimize your environment on a normal basis. You're going to have continuous optimization. And it's just going to go and every so often check, see if there's some optimizations it needs to do, and do it. So you don't even have to come in here and click the button anymore. It's just going to make sure everything is adhering to your business intent and your operational intent, make sure my SQL workloads are where they're supposed to be. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the optimize now button. I'm going to click this button. And what you're going to see is now I've got a screen. It's talking about my recommendations. As you can see, my general purpose is really high on CPU and memory utilization. As you can see, it's going to bring that CPU utilization down quite a bit. It's going to bring my memory utilization, from 82% to 43%. And it's going to kind of show you what that impact is to both clusters that are involved in this. And then if I hit next, what you're going to see here is this is what it's going to move. It's telling me it's going to move this IaaS box because that's one that's tagged with MS SQL, and it's creating a tag violation. And it's saying this SQL box, this MS SQL box needs to be running on the SQL cluster. And then it's also going to move a couple of these other workloads because we have some CPU stress in place, and we want to alleviate that contention. So I'm going to go ahead and hit begin action. It's going to give me a screen saying that, they may take up to 5 minutes to be reflected in this UI and things of that sort. I'm going to click OK. And that's going to go and run, and it's actually going to move those workloads based on what we talked about. Well, this is running. I'm going to quickly jump over to the vCenter and just kind of show you what I have going on here. I've got my general purpose cluster. I've got my SQL cluster. I've got my SQL box. So this is the one that I was showing you that actually has a SQL tag, but it was on the general purpose cluster. And as you can see, actually, as we were sitting here, it got moved. It's sitting now on the SQL cluster. Let's see here. And if I look down here in the bottom, there should be some additional vMotions that are happening. And it's actually relocating a couple of these other workloads over to that cluster also. So this is kind of all happening based on that optimization that's going to happen. And if you look at a lot of these other workloads, I have that general purpose app tagged on them. General purpose app. Pretty much anything I select in here is going to at least have that general purpose app tag. And then if I look at my cluster level on my general purpose, I have it set so that it can run general purpose app workloads. But on my MS SQL cluster, I have it set so that it can run general purpose app workloads and MS SQL workloads. So it's going through, it's doing these vMotions, and once it's done, this screen will update, and I'll have addressed my tag violation and made sure that my SQL instance is running where it should be. And obviously in a production environment, this would probably be multiple SQL servers. This is, a small lab environment, but I wanted to show the functionality. And then it's also going to reduce that CPU stress that we have running on our general purpose cluster. So I wanted to make this quick and concise. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the demo, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for that, John.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. Okay, so let's move forward. So I think what we've talked about so far is kind of what are tags, what are they in infrastructure, and we've articulated some of the VMware products, how they leverage tags. And this slide is meant to show at a higher level, what are some more IT capabilities that can be powered with tags. And we also have an alignment with some of those VMware products. So on the left-hand side there, you see that's where we can kind of create those tag categories and we can apply tags. And on the far right-hand side, you can see we have more advanced capabilities like declarative provisioning and workload placement. So we're enabling a lot of different capabilities with tags across different product sets. So I know a lot of folks are thinking right now, like, okay, that's really cool, and there seems to be a lot of opportunity there, but like, how do you get started? How do you really make this happen? And this is something we talk about all the time with our different customers. And it really starts with documenting your strategy into a spreadsheet. And the power of putting it down on paper and sitting with your peers that are on different teams and getting agreements on what type of tags you want to use is a very critical step, because it means that you're breaking down the silos and you're working together and you're reviewing your build process for what does it take to build a server? What are the questions that need to be asked? And you're putting them down on paper and you're saying, hey, when we build a server and we have to ask the question, is it prod, non-prod, test, dev, QA, whatever those different like options are, it has to be agreed what are all those options and what is the actual name, and let's put it on paper. Same thing with what are the options for server OS. Is it Windows 2012, Windows 2016? Like what are the standard supported OS options? And let's write all those things down, right? So it's really kind of documenting your IT infrastructure standards. And surprisingly, that's actually kind of what your tag categories are at the same time. So once you create that document and you get consensus and synergy with your other teams about this, the next step is to go actually define those categories inside of your products where you're going to reference those tags. So it starts with putting it on paper and then actually going into your tools like vCenter or your IPAM or your public cloud provider and actually defining those tag categories. Because even though you've created your tag strategy, you can't start tagging your workloads until you've gone into those various products and define what tag categories you plan to use. Going down to number 3 there, you might want to also tag your existing workloads. We definitely think it's a good place to start with defining your tag strategy for building net new workloads. But additionally, you may want to go back and tag those existing machines that are in vCenter. And to facilitate that, you might want to create a scripting process to automate that. And there's a lot of different ways to automate that. One of the common ways is to create a spreadsheet, a CSV file, and use a PowerShell script that targets vCenter to tag all those existing workloads. Once you've done that, then it's time to configure your tools to take advantage of those tags that you've agreed upon. Starting with your provisioning tool, we definitely think that VRA through Blueprint YAML and infrastructure code is the quickest, fastest, most efficient way to automate provisioning workloads and the placement logic and applying those tags. VROPs can perform workload balancing as John just showed. Additionally, we can leverage those tags to create custom groups and policies inside of VROPs. This is going to enable more advanced capabilities and get more value out of VROPs by segmenting the environment based on your tags. So what does that tag document look like? Well, this is a sample. You can see on the left-hand side, the top of this document, again, starting with those build tags. And you might want to start with a few tags like environment and platform and workload, and then you might define those options. Some tags are associated with the build process, and then you see on the right-hand side where there's a kind of a tag category for running and operations. So there's certain tags that are more focused on day-to-day running a workload. You might have tags for compliance or DR or SLA. And finally, there's tags that are associated with the development process. You might want to tag your SVN or what configuration management tools you're using. There's a lot of ways that tags can be used for various levels of the lifecycle. So now let's kind of dig into a little bit more about this. So you might be thinking, well, where do you start? There's a lot of stuff that you could put into a tag document. Well, the old keep it simple is definitely a smart way to go. It's tempting to try to classify everything, but it's good to start with the very easy things that everybody's going to agree on. And here we list kind of 3 that we recommend to start off, because it's very easy to have a conversation with everybody about, hey, how do we just even define what's production or not, and what is the actual name? Again, I called out the server OS type. And because you're going down this path, which lends itself to server automation and infrastructure as a service, it might be a good time to implement t-shirt sizing for your workloads. We find that t-shirt sizing in the long haul is the smart way to configure your environment to prepare for a streamlined service provider approach. So going a little bit further down this, so we would be remiss if we didn't talk about cardinality. In the world of tags, there is a correlation between a tag category and a tag name. So cardinality in general, there's kind of 4 different arrangements as is depicted on the screen. But when it comes to infrastructure tagging, we don't want to be dealing with multiple tag categories. So it's always kind of one-to-many or a one-to-one. Also, it's important too to understand that certain systems that will be participating in this tag strategy may not always support one-to-many cardinality. Again, we can't emphasize enough that we want to be doing a lot of upfront planning before we go implement. Here's another example of where we would define that cardinality inside of vCenter. So when you're creating a tag category, you also are going to define if that's going to be a one-to-one or a one-to-many. This needs to be set one time up front. We can't go back and change it. Again, measure twice, cut once. So let's talk about some best practices with defining these tag categories. You don't want to start going with the easy names that might be friendly to you. You want to be considerate of other team members, and you want to think about what's going to lend itself to programming and putting in code. So we want to be consistent and brief. We don't want to use special characters. We want to try to always use lowercase letters. We want to sometimes use camel case if we have multiple words and we want to make that easy to read. We also want to consider the syntax limitations of the different infrastructure investments you have, because not all tooling can support all the different variations of tags that you might end up with. So it's good to understand the limitations of all of those providers before you narrow down on a specific syntax. Also, it's important too to understand that when you're creating a tag category, like environment, you will need to predefine what the possible values are. Like we had talked about, like prod, test, dev. That's an example of where we are predefining the tag names that are in that tag category. And anytime we have predefined tag names up front, then it makes it very easy for us to automate, because when we execute code, we can take a user input value that is expected, and we can make predefined actions on that value. Anytime a user has to manually type in a value, then it's something that is difficult to pre-program logic around. So for example, in a server request form, if somebody needs to type in who the application owner and it's a person's name, that's an example of dynamic input. And that's okay and necessary. And that's a tag that the user would define up front. And we might document that somewhere in the build process. But that's not usually something that we can build logic around. Whenever we predefine values for like environment or server type or app, then we can make automated decisions based on that value. That's a very important consideration. Also, we want to be considerate of some of the public cloud providers like Azure and AWS. They have certain restrictions on the number of tags that they will allow per object. They also have limitations around cardinality. This is just a brief list. Also, a lot of customers ask us, well, hey, we want to go tag all of our workloads. We understand this and we want to move forward. And we provide a script here. It's also publicly available, but this is an example of a PowerShell script that would take a CSV file and it would tag all of their workloads inside of vCenter. This is a fast and efficient way to implement tags. Here's some links that speak to how tags are implemented across a lot of common tooling. It's good to read up on how these tags are implemented as part of your tag strategy. We also have some more information here. Also wanted to show, here's like how tags are implemented in Azure, AWS, Infoblox. You could see the tags sometimes go by different names. And with that, we're just about out of time. Thank you everybody for your participation. And we are, I know I went through a lot of that information quick and it wasn't really easy for you guys to read it all and get the links. But if you guys would like to follow up with us, we can provide you a copy of this information, and we can also provide you a copy of that tag strategy document, which is a great start. Ian, did you want to?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jace. So if anyone is interested who's joined to hear more about how to develop a tagging strategy or to hear more about the services that we've demonstrated, the contact information that you can respond to is the email address that the invite was sent out with. I can include that in the chat window as well if you want to stay on just a little bit longer, along with a direct phone number. We thank you everyone for your time and look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible in the future. Thank you.